Right, welcome back to lecture series number 5, our last lecture series in this module, Strategic Leadership, as part of the MBA course. We have looked in the first 3 sessions as part of this final lecture series at the EFQM, and we've looked at the balanced scorecard and strategy maps based on the balanced scorecard. Those are tools that companies would generally use to be able to then look at performance, profitability, and those kinds of things. I'm now going to go very creative, and I'm going to veer away from these particular tools, and there's loads out there. You could do courses on this, you can Google it, etc., etc. What I'm going to focus on now are the more intangible things that give us an indication of our effectiveness as leaders. And I'm going to focus here quite heavily on the cultures that we create. We've noticed that in the FEQM in terms of stakeholders. We've noticed that in the balanced scorecard in terms of growth and development, that organizational culture, the human capital that delivers on what it is we're trying to achieve as a company, is an absolute core element in any business. And where employees feel they're being treated, mistreated, the culture is poisonous, people leave. And you attract more of the poison into your company. So a really core element in evaluating our leadership impact, and as you are listening to this as a leader in an organization, is what kind of culture is being created in your organization. And that culture is 100% down to the leadership. So let's dive into this, and we're going to start off, we're not going to mess about. We're going to start off by looking at the dark triad. Now, I've been hinting at this all the way through from lecture series number 1. We finally now got to it. We're going to unpack what is the dark triad, and we're going to look at some of the research that I've already started to do in this area around strategic imposterism. So don't forget, we have covered all the learning outcomes in lecture series 1 to 4. Here in lecture series 5, we're looking at how to evaluate these particular areas in terms of our leadership, and we're looking at ways in which we could get that evaluation. So we've looked at some general tools, EFQM, balanced scorecard, and strategy maps. We're now going to go a little bit more creative. We're now going to be looking at the cultures that leaders create in organizations, and we're going to be looking at the different ways in which those cultures can be measured as a form of our leadership. Okay, so let's get stuck in. Let's evaluate our leadership. We're going to be using Northhouse. Northhouse does have a little section on dark triads. Any other material that I'm using, I will indicate the citations. Okay, so Northhouse, in his particular publication, he talks about a toxic triangle. You'll remember this came up in lecture series number 4, the toxic triangle. Destructive leaders, susceptible followers, so weak people that get drawn into the company, that get manipulated. And then both of these creating this kind of environment where the cultural values within the company is that of bullying and harassment and these kinds of things. Again, I remember working for a particular organization where the senior leaders would swear at each other in the meetings. I mean, completely unprofessional behavior. And they would do that sometimes seriously, but also jokingly. But it brewed a really aggressive culture within the organization, and hence this kind of grabbing for power and the abuse of power in that way. We looked at power types in a couple of sessions in the lecture series before this. Okay, so although Burns placed ethics at the core of leadership, there exists a dark side of leadership that exemplifies leadership that is unethical and destructive. So where ethics is a core measurement of leadership, right? Ethics is at the core of leadership. Where there is a lack of ethics, it's not the organization's fault. It's not the employee's fault. It's leadership's fault. They create the culture. And so where there is an absence of ethics, that's leadership. And it's a clear evaluation tool. What is the ethical culture and standards within your organization? If it's low, that's you. You are the leader, and it's right down to your responsibility. Now, some leaders don't give two hoots. They don't care about ethics. They care about power grabs, status, all these different kinds of things. So defined in chapter 8, transformational leadership, as FIDO transformational leadership. FIDO is kind of like a fake. And discussed in chapter 13 under followership, which picks up on the susceptible followers in regards to destructive leadership. We're going to go into the dark side of leadership. It's a destructive and toxic side of leadership. Toxic means, think about the word toxic, right? If something is toxic, it influences and spreads, right? So if you're in the environment of something which is toxic, you will get ill, right? It influences, not for the good, for the negative, right? Toxic side of leadership. Leaders use leadership for their personal ends. Power grabbing, status, position, all these kind of things. And I've worked in so many organizations where I've literally seen this. Now, the sad thing is, quite often this goes unchallenged and remains below the radar. It's very strategic until something happens and all of a sudden, bang, it comes out. And then the interesting thing is how this is handled. And I've worked for 2 organizations where it wasn't handled at all. And I left after that. It creates a toxic environment. So Lipman and Blumen suggest that toxic leaders are characterized by destructive behaviors such as leaving their followers worse off than they found them. I've left one organization and it still pains me to think about my experience that I had there, and it really annoys me and aggravates me that nothing was done about it. And things keep coming out. It actually ends up on the national news. Similar issues related to these kinds of things where they were being swept under the carpet. It violates the basic human rights of others. That's the bit that frustrates me, is that I was unknowingly being violated in some ways, right? The bullying, the harassment, all that kind of stuff, and playing to followers' basic fears. Quite often, people don't whistleblow because they fear intimidation, they fear losing their jobs. And again, this is why strategic human resource management is so important, because they should be addressing these kind of environments, and they should be looking out for what's called destructive dismissal, forcing people out because, just abide. But if you don't want to abide, then leave, right? That's destructive dismissal. And that's because of the toxic environment. At this point in time, I'm happy to say that I've always been involved in the unions in the UK, and I've actually used them 3 times to address toxic situations. One of them being this organization that I'm referring to, where I'm really annoyed and hurt by what happened there. I did leave in the end, but I forced them to pay me to leave. Now, again, in some ways, it was a small reward for what I had to go through, but it was still injustice. I'd rather have seen justice. I'd rather have seen my senior manager, who was line managing me, being fired because he should have been. Wasn't really disciplined, maintained in his position, continued to be promoted. Ridiculous. So dysfunctional personal characteristics of destructive leaders are seen in, for example, a lack of integrity. They lie. They pretend to know things when they don't. So integrity is a big issue. And again, I've worked for a university where I wasn't working under this person, but this person influenced the work I was doing, and they were this kind of person. I'm not swearing, this is an actual academic technical term. He was bullshitting. So using language to create an impression of knowing, but actually if you know what you know, and you are an expert in that, you'll know that what he's doing is talking nonsense, right? Let me not use the word. And we'll come back to this in a little bit. And it's all about integrity. Insatiable ambition. And the reason why he did this is because he continues to strive for titles, for salary, for status, right? Ambition. And he'll do whatever it takes to stay at top and push anybody else down around them. Arrogant, absolute arrogance. So they won't admit any of this kind of stuff. And reckless disregard for their actions, particularly if they get away with it once. They know that they're being supported by senior management for some reason. Why senior management does that, and that adds further. I left a particular university because when I raised all these issues around this person's integrity, they were unprofessional. Their staff were unprofessional towards employers, students, etc. Staff. Showed this to the senior leaders, and they did nothing. They did nothing. In fact, again, he got a promotion. And at that point in time, again, and like I said, I've worked for a few organizations. There were 3 that were toxic. I left. I resigned because that behavior was going to get worse, because it is then the reckless disregard for actions is because of the culture, the toxic culture. So if you have issues in your company where bullying keeps coming out, harassment keeps coming out, sexual issues keep coming out, it's because of leadership. You want to evaluate your leadership? What's the culture like? What's the culture like where you work? What are the issues that HR needs to deal with? And where are you burying your head in the sand? You are responsible as a senior leader for the ethics in your company. In addition, using 2 different toxic leadership questionnaires, Singh et al. Identified 8 factors of perceived toxicity in leaders, and they did their studies in India. So this included managerial incompetency, and this is quite often the thing that really annoys me, is that they are using their personality, they're using their positions, their networks to recklessly disregard what should be happening performance-wise, and actually they don't know what they're doing. And so where the company is struggling, and this company at the university that I have left is struggling, they will continue to struggle because they've got incompetent managers in place. They've got incompetent leaders in place. But rather than deal with that, everyone else is being affected further down the food chain, but nothing's changing at the top, right? Managerial incompetency. They have dark traits in terms of bullying, harassment, the use of power, all those power types, and the bad way, coercive behavior. They are derisive in terms of supervision, so bullying in the way in which they supervise. The impervious despotic leadership, in other words, again, they don't care, right? Reckless behavior. There's a lack of ethics. Their behavior, you never know what you get from them. One day they're nice, they're charming, and the next day they're just aggressive and whatever. They're narcissistic. It's all about them. They have zero empathy, and they're self-promoting. So we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail. Now, I'm sharing this with you if you really are serious about being a good leader, about being a world-class role model leader, and therefore leading organizations to become world-class organizations. You need to avoid this kind of thing. But if you're noticing this kind of thing in your companies by managers or other leaders, you have to address it, because you are creating the culture, the leadership culture within your organizations. Right, so we have the toxic triangle that comes from Northhouse. We have a concept which is known within leadership studies called the dark triad. It refers to Machiavellism. I can never say that word. It's somebody who is nice in your face, but then stabs you in the back at the right moment, and they take over. Right? That's Machiavellism. That word. Look it up. There's a story around this particular person. I think it was during the Roman Empire. Psychopaths, right? Psychopathy. They're psychopaths, man. There's something not right up there. And narcissism, right? Lack of empathy, and it's all about me, and they play victim and all that. Now, I've also done some research around what's called strategic imposterism. I'm going to show you that in a minute. And that, again, also creates a slight kind of triangle, but it connects to the toxic triangle and the dark triad. So what is a strategic imposter? A strategic imposter is somebody who charades success, right? Like the emperor who was naked. Right? They thought they were famous. Nobody wanted to say anything, but he's walking around the street naked. He didn't have any clothes on him. Right? They charade in success. They hide actual failure. They hide behind their title. They hide behind. They blame somebody else, etc. Right? Not necessarily a burden by authentic self-doubt. So they don't actually doubt themselves, but they are just rubbish. They're rubbish leaders. And so they appear modest, but actually they're incompetent, and you can see that in the work they do. Turn out success despite their assumed incompetencies. Quite often they throw money at things. So the success is not really down to them and their ability. Success is the fact that they got access to money, to power. They wield power to then create force success, but it's not true success. Right? It's a facade. Anderson Zorn, they define strategic imposters as not having high anxiety because they get away with things. They have negative, they don't really have negative emotions. They're prone to perfectionism. and not being under stress. Interesting way to take the strategic imposter. So it includes interpersonal strategies designed to convey a particular social identity to other people, claiming to feel like an imposter rather than actually recognizing that they are being an imposter. It's all about power, complying to the senior level. So they're very good friends with the power structures around them, but they're not to be bothered about people underneath them, because it doesn't affect them, right? Who cares about whether I talk to you or not? Backhanded compliments, etc., etc. When these behaviors are apparent among leavers, not only does this create challenges for those under their leadership, but it also creates dysfunctional cultures. The imposter syndrome. They've often ended up in positions due to loyalty, not due to their competency. Strategic imposterism often comes through in what is called self-preservation or impression management. So it's very important to uphold this facade, and they'll do that at any level. So they will backlash at people who challenge them, etc., etc. They will use tactical efforts to dupe people, right? Lots of, they're quite charming people, but actually, again, competence-wise, they just don't deliver. But they cover up those errors. There's always a reason why, right? There's always excuses. They conceal their own self-preservation intent. Soft persuasions, intimidation, appearing powerful, and you can see all of these kind of things to profit from an advantage of attrition. Impression in other minds, often not authentic. Again, this is linked to narcissism and hubris behavior. Again, just some definitions of narcissism. It's self-centered, self-aggrandizing. They boast, right? It's all about me. It's what I've achieved, etc., etc. Now, one of the things that really got to me in this particular university where I worked is that the organization itself got an invite to attend an award ceremony by one of the employers. Now, they wouldn't have a clue about any of the students who are linked to this particular employer, but they went along. Rather than taking some staff who did know the students, who would be, reward, right, in terms of motivation, they wanted to be there. They wanted to be in the limelight. And they posted pictures of themselves enjoying themselves. But guaranteed, if I said to them, can you name me a student who works in this organization? They wouldn't have a clue. It's just so self-centered and so arrogant and so boastful, and even putting pictures of themselves. It wound me up like you cannot believe. And yet they just drop the ball all the time. Hubris, self-aggregating display, so again, boastful. Just taking kind of credit and not rewarding those who actually create the success. Here I said that the term bullshit is an actual academic term, but it's basically people who don't know what they're doing. They don't know something, but they appear as if they do, right? So again, strategic imposterism. There's a lack of accountability. They're being deceitful. They abuse their power. It's about status and position. They misrepresent things. And they use language, a lot of acronyms. They use the trendy words. A very kind of flaky word. Again, the director of the company, of this department, I looked at one of his, he's got a thing on YouTube, and he did like a 10-15 minute speech at a very big profile thing again. And when you listen to it, actually, there's loads of these, acronyms and words, but what does it mean? It's like somebody who's just come across big words and they've thrown them into a sentence. It doesn't actually mean anything. And where it does mean something, it's not new. It's just regurgitating what's already out there. So in terms of input, there was no actual input as a speaker. But again, because it's so charming and it sounds so intelligent, nobody challenges it, particularly if you don't know what's going on in terms of the context. Psychopathic behavior, so deceptive, reckless, callous, lack of impulse control, antisocial behavior quite often, particularly if you trigger them, Machiavellianism, so somebody who is cynical, they stab you in the back in the last minute so you don't see it, high levels of cynicism, emotional exhaustion, Apparently, this is quite prominent among younger managers. Maybe the taste of power for the first time. They don't know how to handle it. All of this kind of stuff leads to bullying. It leads to other people burning out because of the pressures and the stress at work, the dishonesty, and quite often ethical things are being broken in the process. So if I had to conceptualize it, this is kind of how I would conceptualize it. So what bullshitting looks like on the left-hand side, impression management in the middle, bearing in mind that narcissism is in there, mechanism, what that looks like. And then some of the solutions, particularly dealing with the flaky jargon, is on the right-hand side. And again, don't forget the toxic triangle and the dark triad. So all of these kind of things are examples of a lack of leadership, a lack of ethics, and therefore a lack of the right culture within which an organization operates. And this leads to workplace bullying, such as harassment, abuse, displeasure, insults, sabotage, scapegoating, all these kinds of things. And these are just some headlines that I grabbed from 2024, which is on the news at the moment in the UK. So from topresume.com, yelling, lying and rude comments, workplace bullying. From mydisabilityjobs.com, workplace bullying statistics, research and facts. 94% employees said they have been bullied in the workplace. 96% of professionals have felt bullied in the workplace. Some practical examples: we know that Harrods at the moment is in the news. The previous owner sexually harassed people. Huge issues going on at the moment. And of course, we know the whole Royal Mail scandal, that people were falsely accused and then they were bullied and harassed to basically plead guilty when they knew they were innocent. How do you want to evaluate your leadership? What's the culture like? What's the culture like? So I've come out guns blazing on this particular one. If you want to evaluate your leadership, the bottom line for me, the question is, what is the workplace culture like? Is it an encouraging, motivational, innovative environment where everybody wants to put their best foot forward because they get rewarded? Or is it this? And if it's this, you're failing. There's your evaluation. Let's get into the next session.